The snowstorm hit hard when Officer Grant Holloway checked his wallet. $7. Enough to feed Timber, his loyal K9, until a biker collapsed beside the pumps, clutching his chest like he was being strangled from the inside. The clerk warned, "Don't help him. Bikers make enemies, and they take you down with them." Grant ignored it. Timber wouldn't look away, so neither did he. $7 bought medicine for a stranger barely holding on to life. As the biker faded out, he gripped Grant's sleeve and whispered, "If they come, tell them Dennis owes a life." Grant thought he saved one man. He didn't know 150 motorcycles would soon come to collect the debt. Subscribe to hear how $7 turned a quiet town upside down. Snow fell in slow, stubborn flakes, drifting sideways under the wind, quiet in the mountain road like a held breath. Grant Holloway stepped out of the patrol truck with the weary stride of a man who had given his body to long winters. 39, tall, lean from long shifts and skipped meals, he wore a navy police jacket zipped to his throat, still dusted white from the chase through the forest. His breath hung in the cold air as he opened the back door, letting Timber hop down gently. An aging German shepherd, 7 years old, with brown and black fur and a broad chest that rose and fell with a tired determination. The dog shook the snow from his coat and stood close, as if guarding the last scrap of warmth left between them. Grant looked down at him, the way a man looks at the only steady thing in his life. Together, they crossed the empty parking lot toward the light of a small gas station, its windows fogged, its neon flickering like a dying memory. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee and cheap floor cleaner. Grant took out his wallet, thin as the wind outside, and counted the wrinkled bills. $7. Enough for Timber's breakfast in the morning, a few cans of food that would keep the old dog strong. The clerk, a young man with a tired face and a red hoodie, barely looked up from the register. Grant asked nothing more. Hunger was familiar, and a man learns to accept its company without complaint. He turned toward the door when a sound cut through the stillness, a heavy wheeze, thick with panic. Outside, beneath the buzzing street lamp, a biker staggered and fell beside a chrome motorcycle, clutching his chest. Leather jacket, broad shoulders, gray beard frozen with frost. The clerk shouted from behind the counter, voice shaking with fear more than concern, "Don't get involved with those guys, they're trouble." For a moment, Grant stood still. Duty pulled him one way, exhaustion the other. Timber tilted his head, waiting, a soldier awaiting command. Grant stepped back into the night, the snow stinging his face, and knelt beside the man. No badge on this earth could ignore a life slipping away. He ran back inside, grabbed a bottle of water and aspirin, $7 exactly. He handed the bills over without hesitation, without thinking of his own hunger or Timber's. Outside again, he lifted the biker's head, pressed the pills to his mouth, poured water between numb lips, holding him upright against death itself. The man's breathing slowed, then steadied, just enough for words. His hand, heavy and trembling, clutched Grant's wrist. "If they find you, tell them Dennis still owes a life." The wind swallowed the biker's voice as his eyes closed, not in death, but in a fragile returning. Grant sat there, unsure why those words chilled him more than the snow. Timber leaned close, warm against his side, sensing something unspoken. In the quiet, Grant understood he had stepped into a debt he had not asked for. Oh, debt paid with more than money. And for the first time that night, the storm did not feel like weather. It felt like consequence. The morning came pale and quiet, its light thin as paper, stretching across the snow like a memory refusing to fade. Grant Holloway arrived at the small mountain precinct with stiff steps, the kind of tiredness that comes more from thinking than from lack of sleep. His navy jacket remained zipped high on his chest, trapping the last bit of warmth he carried from the night before. Timber trotted beside him, slower than usual, the old dog's brown and black fur still clinging to the smell of snow and cold asphalt. They walked through the hallway lined with old frame photographs of officers who were now gone or retired, their faces hardened by years of choosing what was right over what was easy. Grant glanced at them without intention, but the weight of their silent judgment seemed to follow him into the briefing room. Captain Morris stood waiting, a man in his early 60s with steel-gray hair, heavy eyebrows, and a voice like gravel dragged across wood. He wore a thick police coat over his uniform, always zipped, always neat, a symbol of the order he demanded. With a brief nod, he handed Grant a file. "We've got a breach at a military ammo depot," he said quietly, as though the walls could betray him. "Looks like biker trafficking. One group keeps showing up in rumors, Iron Legacy." The name crawled into Grant's gut with a coldness deeper than the weather. Morris slid a printed security still across the desk, a dark leather jacket bearing a patch of a skull within a winged crown, half hidden by shadow. Grant had seen it before, smeared in frost, pressed against the freezing asphalt, wrapped around the chest of a dying man. The room felt smaller. Timber sniffed the still image, as if scent lived in ink. Grant swallowed. "You'll be lead investigator," Morris continued. "If we nail 'em, the feds take over and this town gets some peace." It was meant as motivation, but the words felt like a chain tightening. Peace. At what cost? Grant nodded, and Timber raised his head, sensing the shift in the air, the way only loyal animals notice the tremor inside a man. In the evidence room, Grant sorted through items collected from the depot. A torn motorcycle glove, still damp from melted snow, lay sealed in plastic. He slit the bag, and Timber leaned closer. The dog sniffed once, paused, then lowered his ears, not in fear, but in recognition. Grant lifted the glove to his own nose and caught the faint scent of motor oil, cold metal, and something harsher, industrial chemicals mixed with sweat and winter leather. The same smell from last night. Grant stood there, frozen in the quiet. He saw the biker's gray beard, the heavy jacket, the trembling hand gripping his arm. If he filed the report honestly, that man would be hunted. If he withheld information, he would betray his badge. The coin of conscience had landed on its edge, refusing to fall. Timber nudged his hand gently, as if urging him to choose the world his heart believed in, not the one written in black ink and signatures. Rain tapped softly on the old tin roof, a tired rhythm that seemed to echo the weight of the house itself. Grant Holloway sat at the small wooden table inside his cabin, its walls breathing with age. The place smelled of wet pine and smoke from a fire that never burned quite bright enough. His navy jacket hung on a hook by the door, still zipped and stiff with cold from the morning. Timber lay near the wood stove on a thin blanket, his broad-chested body curled against the warmth, brown and black fur rising and falling with shallow breaths. The old German shepherd shifted, and a soft whimper slipped from him. Not from fear, but pain. When he tried to stand, he favored one leg, dragging it slightly before settling again. Grant watched, heavy with a helplessness that had crept deeper than any winter wind. Later, at the small veterinary clinic near the town limits, a middle-aged veterinarian named Dr. Ames spoke with a voice worn from years of bad news. He was a quiet, patient man, his gray hair combed back, coat pockets stuffed with pens and tools. He lifted Timber's injured leg gently, tracing along the joint. "Old injury, flaring up again," he murmured. "He needs medication, strong stuff. It'll help with the pain, help him walk." Grant nodded, waiting for a number he already feared. Dr. Ames set the bottle in his hand, hesitated, then sighed. "This isn't cheap, Grant. I know you're doing your best." The price echoed louder than the rain. Medication now overdue, debt still unpaid, bills stacking like fallen timber. A man can live on little, but a dog who gives his life for you shouldn't have to. Back home, the fire crackled in uneven bursts. Timber lay beside Grant's chair, his leg trembling in sleep. On the table, a worn folder held his medical records, stamped with overdue notices. Grant held it in one hand, his phone in the other. The screen lit up, showing the file from the investigation. Iron legacy, the leather jacket, the man with the gray beard. The man who might be a criminal. The man whose life Grant saved with his last $7. One phone call, one report, and the department would pay attention. Cases like that bring money, reward, leverage. Enough to save his dog, enough to help his father, enough to breathe without debt pressing on his chest. He stared at the digits, at the contact he could call. Timber stirred, tail brushing against Grant's boot. Then slowly, the old dog lifted his head and rested it on Grant's hand. No pleading, no demand, just the warm weight of loyalty, steady and familiar. Grant set the phone down, exhaling a long, quiet breath. Some debts weren't meant to be collected at the cost of others. Outside, the rain softened, and the cabin settled into stillness, as if the world respected the choice he wasn't willing to betray. A quiet morning held its breath under a pale sky, the air still as if waiting for something to arrive. Grant Holloway zipped his navy jacket higher against the cold, standing outside the sheriff's small brick office. The town usually woke slowly, coffee brewing behind fogged windows, shovels scraping frost from truck windshields. Today, however, the silence broke. A low rumble rolled in from the road leading up the ridge. It grew louder, heavier, until the earth itself seemed to tremble. Timber, lying near Grant's feet, lifted his head, ears pricked, his brown and black fur stiffening as if sensing something familiar before any human could. Grant stepped closer to the street as the sky filled with the thunder of engines. Not 10 motorcycles, not 20, more than 100, lined shoulder to shoulder, black and chrome stretching like a steel river across the town's only road. Windows slammed shut, curtains snapped shut in fear. Someone yelled, "They're here for revenge!" The engines cut off in one synchronized breath. A silence heavier than noise replaced it. A man stepped down from the lead motorcycle, stiff boots pressing into the gravel. His frame was broad, wrapped in a worn leather biker jacket, dusted with cold from the wind. Gray hair fell to his collar, and a thick beard framed the sharpness of his features. Dennis Harlow. The same man Grant had saved with the last of his $7 in a snowstorm. Dennis set aside his helmet as if laying down a weapon. He looked older in daylight, lines etched deep around his mouth, eyes shadowed by a history no one in this town cared to understand. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He looked determined. Timber moved forward half a step, steady, alert, but calm, like he recognized the scent beneath the leather and ice. Grant whispered, "Easy, boy." Dennis looked straight at him, voice rough, loud enough for everyone hiding behind their curtains. "I've come to settle a debt, the debt my life owes to your kindness." Murmurs stirred behind closed doors. No threats, no demand, just these words heavy and startling. Grant felt an uncertain weight press into his chest. Repayment, gratitude. In a world where people feared men like Dennis, why would he come back to honor something so small? The other riders didn't move. No weapons raised. No fists tightened. They waited, engines cooling, as if their presence was a tribute. The town didn't understand. Grant didn't either. One man stepped forward because of a single act of mercy. But when a man like Dennis pays back a debt, How does he pay it? In the quiet, Grant felt Timber's presence by his leg, steady as a promise. Maybe kindness travels farther than fear, carried by steel wheels and rough voices. Maybe debts of gratitude don't bring danger, but change. No one spoke. Even the wind waited. Grant realized that sometimes what looks like a threat is simply an answer arriving, and answers are rarely quiet. The light through the blinds was thin, pale, and unsteady, like winter sunlight, unsure of its strength. Dennis Harlow sat across from Grant Holloway in the small back office of the sheriff's building. The room smelled of coffee gone cold and paper older than its drawer. Grant kept his jacket zipped tight, even indoors, a habit that felt like armor more than warmth. Timber settled at his feet, quiet but alert, his thick brown and black fur rising and falling with slow breaths. Dennis looked different away from his riders, less imposing, more worn. The deep gray beard framed a jaw pulled tight with restraint. His voice, rough as gravel under a tire, began slowly. "We're not who they think we are." He slid a folder forward with hands that bore years of windburn and work. Grant opened it not as a cop chasing criminals, but as a man who felt the weight of a debt shared between strangers. Inside were photos, not of guns or violence, but fundraisers, food drives, hospital bills stamped paid, a logo signed at the bottom, Iron Legacy Veterans Charity. Dennis leaned back, eyes low, as if bracing to be disbelieved. "We help those the country forgot, men who served, who came back with no one waiting." He pulled a small USB drive from his jacket, scratched and dented by road miles. "The ones stealing weapons wore fake patches. They want to bury us with their crimes. If the police follow the wrong trail, innocent men, broken men, become the criminals they never were." His jaw clenched, not from anger, but something heavier, humiliation. He wasn't pleading for freedom. He was pleading for the truth. Grant felt the heaviness settle into him like snow on an unshoveled roof. He had saved the right man, but the world didn't know it. The town, the press, even his own department. They were hungry for someone to blame. Timber lifted his head, pressing against Grant's leg, as though he sensed a decision forming. Grant thought of his father lying in a hospital bed, of the unpaid bills, of Timber's medication waiting behind a counter he couldn't afford. The right decision could help them both. The wrong one could ruin men who had already been ruined once before. Dennis didn't ask with desperation. He asked with dignity, voice steady. "Help us clear our name. Help us stop the ones who use our service to hide their business." Grant saw beyond the leather jacket, beyond the engines that frightened an entire town. He saw a man surviving in the only brotherhood willing to claim him. A man who brought 150 others not to threaten, but to honor. Grant closed the folder gently, like something fragile. "If we do this," he said, choosing each word with care, "we do it the right way." Outside, frost clung to the window glass, glowing under the morning sun as if something long frozen had begun to thaw. The afternoon sky burned orange, not from sunset, but from something darker climbing into the air. Alarms rang through town, sharp and frantic, echoing against the empty grain silos. Smoke climbed in thick gray spirals from the old storage warehouse by the railroad tracks. Grant Holloway arrived with Timber at his side, the German shepherd's gait slow but determined, his injured leg dragging just slightly. Flames licked out through shattered windows, pouring heat like breath from a furnace. In the crowd, panic moved faster than the fire. A mother cried out, voice breaking the smoke, "My daughter, she's still inside." The words cracked through Grant like glass. He turned to the doorway, but a beam had collapsed, spraying sparks and debris. Before he could move, Timber surged forward, body low, muscles shaking, brown and black fur illuminated by the glow like charcoal catching light. Inside, the building was a maze of heat. Timber coughed, lowered himself close to the ground, nose working with fierce purpose. He found the girl, a small child curled near a stack of grain bags, face streaked with soot, hands trembling. Timber nudged her arm, pushing, pulling toward the exit. She sobbed as he gripped her sleeve gently, dragging her through smoke so thick it felt like night inside a burning day. Outside, Grant fought to get in, yelling through his mask, voice raw. "Timber, back, that's an order." But some loyalties reach beyond command. Some love ignores danger. Timber kept going, hauling the child step by step until they reached the doorway and collapsed into Grant's arms. People gasped. A dozen phones were raised. Shouts turned to cheers as the child clung to her mother, crying into her coat. Timber lay on the asphalt, sides heaving, singed fur smelling of smoke. Grant knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his chest, feeling each breath like a pulse of gratitude. The crowd closed in slowly, not to question, not to judge, but to witness. The same townspeople who pulled curtains shut and whispered gang trouble now filmed with awe, capturing a truth no rumor could silence. The fire truck sirens faded into the background as the flames were contained, but what changed was not the blaze, it was the hearts watching. Someone said softly, "That dog saved her life." Another whispered, "And the officer stayed by him." No one mentioned bikers. No one spoke of fear. Grant looked around and saw it clearly. Sometimes a town needs flames not to destroy, but to reveal who they can trust. Timber shifted, resting his head on Grant's boot the way he always did, simple, loyal, without expectation. Grant clasped the dog's collar, voice barely above a breath. "We're still here, partner." And for the first time, the town seemed to stand with him. Snow fell in slow, tired flakes, drifting like feathered ash over the quiet town. The fire was out, but its memory lingered in the smell of smoke trapped in winter coats and the dark stains on brick walls. Timber walked with a limp now, each step careful, the old German shepherd's brown and black fur still singed at the tips. He stayed close to Grant, as though the blaze had tied them tighter. The town gathered in the school gym, folding chairs, hot coffee in paper cups, children wrapped in scarves. Men who once muttered troublemakers now nodded respectfully to the row of bikers by the wall. Leather jackets still rough and creased, but no longer feared. Dennis Harlow stood at the front, his heavy gray beard washed clean, hair falling straight against his worn jacket. His voice carried not power, but gratitude. "That dog is a hero," he said softly, letting silence do half the work. Grant bowed his head, feeling Timber lean against his boot, steady as ever. They presented a wooden plaque, Timber's Shield. The name felt larger than the wood it was carved into. Dennis explained the idea. A fund for retired and injured service dogs, those who guarded, searched, saved, got forgotten. His hands, calloused from road and weather, held the plaque like something breakable. They serve without asking why, so we choose to care without asking who. The gym quieted. A few men wiped their eyes, pretending it was the cold. Grant watched them, realizing how rarely such a room held bikers, police, teachers, ranch workers, and veterans under one purpose without tension. Timber nudged him again, and the officer placed his hand gently on the dog's back, feeling the warmth beneath his coat. Grant spoke only a little, voice even and low. "Timber's given more than most people ever will. If we take care of him, we take care of every life he protected too." The words were simple, but they landed like truth. A local carpenter offered free kennels. A rancher pledged food. The grocer promised donations from every sale of pet supplies. Even the shy librarian raised a hand and whispered, "We can honor their stories here." In books. No one laughed. The world felt kinder in that moment, like winter easing its grip. As everyone applauded, Timber didn't bark. He simply rested against Grant's leg, breathing slow, tired, but proud. Grant bent down, pressing a quiet kiss to his head, not for the crowd, but for the years they had shared in silence and risk. Sometimes shields aren't made of metal or badges. Sometimes they're made of loyalty, worn gently, and earned one life at a time. Sunlight rested gently on the cabin porch, warm enough to soften the last trace of winter. The building looked almost new, though its bones were old. Fresh timber framed the doorway, and a wooden sign hung above it, carved by a local carpenter. Timber House. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a place for training. K9 rescue dogs, retired service dogs, strays with potential and stories yet to be written. Inside, clean kennels lined the walls, the smell of cedar shavings and fresh hay replacing the old damp scent of loneliness. Timber moved slowly but proudly, wearing a small honorary badge on his harness, fur glossier, steps steadier than the year before. His injury hadn't vanished, but it no longer held him back. Neither did Grant's debts. Bills had been paid quietly through iron legacy, not as charity, but as repayment for dignity. Grant's father, thinner but brighter now, sat in a chair near the front window, wrapped in a clean wool blanket, nodding like a man who finally saw his son at peace. The town had gathered outside, faces familiar but changed. No suspicious glances, no anxious whispering. Children played near the fence, tugging at their parents' sleeves, wanting to pet the hero dog. Men in leather jackets stood beside police officers, sharing thermoses of coffee and jokes under their breath. Dennis Harlow stood near the steps, his heavy gray beard neatly trimmed for the occasion, wearing the same worn jacket but holding something new. The Iron Legacy emblem pressed in his fist, polished as though he had been shining it for weeks. This time, his presence didn't make the street tense. Instead, engines from the motorcycles idling nearby felt like applause, low and steady, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Grant stepped forward, zipped navy jacket fitting him like memory and purpose. He didn't speak loudly. The microphone wasn't necessary for his kind of truth. "I once had $7, he began, voice steady, humble. People leaned in, not to hear better, but to feel closer. I thought it was for Timber's meal, but that night I had to choose whether to feed my partner or to save a stranger." His pause wasn't dramatic, just honest. I didn't know that choice would save my life too. The quiet that followed felt like prayer. Timber pressed his head against Grant's leg, a gesture unchanged from the night of the snowstorm. Grant rested a hand there, fingers curled gently into fur that had stood between danger and innocence countless times. "I didn't know," he continued softly, "that saving one man could save a town, or that kindness could travel this far on two wheels and four paws." Laughter, warm and small, rippled through the crowd. Dennis lowered his gaze, eyes glistening, thumb rubbing the Iron Legacy emblem as though touching something sacred. Timber lifted his head, gave a single bark, more like a response, a punctuation mark of loyalty. Engines roared again, not as threat, but as chorus. Families clapped, bikers smiled, officers nodded. In a world where noise often divides, this rumble felt like unity humming through steel and breath. Grant knelt, hugging Timber gently, forehead against fur, whispering a promise only the dog needed to hear. Sometimes, a life doesn't change from big decisions, but from one small moment of mercy, offered when no one expects it. And sometimes, the world returns that mercy, multiplied. What began with $7 had become a legacy of trust. Sometimes a choice feels too small to matter. Just $7, a moment of doubt, a stranger on the edge of life. But kindness given in secrecy can echo farther than we imagine. That night in the snowstorm, one decision didn't just save a biker, it saved a wounded town, a loyal K9, and a man who thought he had nothing left to give. When the world feels cold and unfair, remember that a single act of courage can rewrite someone's future, including your own. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to join our family of listeners. May God bless you with strength, purpose, and compassion in every day ahead.